My name is Bicycle Bernie, and I'm about to show you a tutorial from VoltBikes on how to change the rear tube on the VoltBike Mariner. These are the tools that you would require. As you can see, there's not a lot here. I don't think you need much more than that. So we'll get to those. And of course you need your pump to put air in the tire after. Okay, so the first thing you want to do with your VoltBike Mariner is take off this little package. It's just Velcroed on here. That's step number one. And then after that, we'll put it aside because you're going to need to put that back. And step number two, this is important. It's got a little zap strap here. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm just going to cut it off. And what that does by cutting it off, it allows you to do this, which is unplug the main power system. So we'll just put that up there. So now you've freed essentially it here. You don't have to go any further there. Another thing you might want is a rag just to keep your hands clean, depending on how dusty your bike is. So what you want to do next is just loosen this off, like so. Sometimes they're a little tricky, most of the time not. And you can just keep it hanging like that. You don't need to remove it completely. And then you take your 18mm wrench, and you want to just take off the axle nuts. Before you actually take them off and out of place, you just want to pay attention to the order of the washers that are in there, in the behind the nut, and how they're presented on both sides. So as you take the nut off and as you take each individual washer off, place them in the order that you took them off. Otherwise you may get confused. So with your 18mm wrench, just loosen the nut like so. Once it's loose, you can back the nut off with your fingers. And we're going to take this off. And that way we can take off each nut independently and washer. And we're just going to place them there on the order that we took it off so we don't forget. And once again, you're going to place the nuts and washers in the order you took it off so that you don't forget that. Also, one thing you want to just pay attention to is usually the last washer on both sides has a little indentation there. That indentation goes inside the frame stay. So you want to make sure you want to put it back on properly. Okay? You don't want to put it on like that. That would be a mistake. So, like so. Okay? Took off the hardware or the washers and the nut on this side. So at this point the wheel is essentially ready to come out. It will. I keep it in place with my knee. However you want to keep it in place, because at this point it's going to come out. And I'll show you what I mean by that. There you go. It's essentially out. And if you want to walk over to this side, George, if you just kind of point the camera down at this system, your chain is on the sprockets, and that kind of catches slightly. You just want to make sure you move the chain away from the sprockets, and there you have it. Okay, so once you took the wheel off, that's great, but you also need to remember that on each side of the axle are the inside washers, and there's an order for those too. Just point that out there. So when you take these off, make sure you remember how the order was and place them where you can go back to it, and they're there and they're not mixed up. So that was the left side of the axle, and then the right side of the axle, there's a couple of smaller washers in there, and we'll just make sure that we know how they go back on. Okay, so the tire's off. We're going to take off the valve cap. I'm sure everybody knows how to do that, so I won't tell you how to do that. The valve cap removed. What I like to do when I'm changing the tube on a tire is just let the rest of the air out. This might, not all the air, but most of it. The tire becomes much easier to work with as you have less air in there. The tube becomes much easier to work with. Okay, so what I do next on the when you're taking the tube out is with the tire wrenches. You put the first one, doesn't really matter where on the tire you put it, just kind of hold it in place like that. And the second one goes pretty close to it. You want to just slide that under there also. So now you've got two in there like that. Just be careful they don't flip out at you. And then the third one, that'll get it started nicely. So now you can see that you've taken some of the tire off, and then you just work your way around it like so, and you can see with these large tire wrenches very quickly your tire will come off the rim and you're good. Just be careful when you're doing this that you don't put your hand into that would hurt a lot. So we're ready to take the tube out of the tire now. So this is the valve stem here. You just want to work it up out of its insert hole, just like that. And then at this point, you're just ready to slightly tug out the tube. Just be careful once again for the cassette here when you're taking it out. So we've taken the old tube out, and one thing that's going to make the job a little easier is you want to identify where on the tube the leak was. And often you can do that just by looking at the tube itself. If this is how we took it out, this is the stem and that's where it was inserted. So you kind of just keep that in place. And if you can actually see a puncture, most of the time they're really, really small. But if you visually inspect the tube, sometimes you're lucky and you can actually see where it's punctured. In this case, I'm not seeing any puncture on the tube, so that's okay. Sometimes you're going to see it, sometimes you're not. And in this case, we also suspect that it might be a slow leak in here. Okay, so we've taken the tire out, the tube out, and we've inspected the tube, and we couldn't see where it was punctured. So you might want to try this. This is important because if you can identify what had punctured your tube causing the flat, that's great. You're really well ahead of the ballgame if you can do that. So what I've done throughout the years, and you have to be a little careful doing this, but it certainly is possible, is you're just using your hand and your fingers. You run it along the inside of the tire, and you just kind of do this all over the tire. Don't press too hard, otherwise whatever caused the puncture, if it's still in the tire, you know, you're going to run that into your fingers, and that would hurt. So just doing this method, check for maybe something that might have caused the puncture. Sometimes it's a staple. There's a lot of those on the ground. Sometimes it's a piece of glass. But, you know, both of those things can be sharp, so when you're doing this, just be really careful. And you may be lucky, you may find it, and then you can just take it out after you find whatever caused the puncture. But this is a good trick, just be careful with your fingers. Okay, so what we've done with the new tube is we've given it a little bit of form. We put some air in here, and by doing that, it allows us to tuck it inside the tube and tire, or inside the tire a little easier. So if you'd like to give your new tube a little bit of air, a little bit of form, it just makes it a lot easier when you're tucking it inside. So I'll kind of demonstrate that now. It's kind of similar to pillowcase. They're both tricky. You're kind of tucking it in place like that. We gave the tube some form to slide it inside the tire, which was easier to do. And now you just tuck the valve stem into its valve stem hole on the rim. What you want to do now is just lay the tire down and slowly work the tire on the inside of the rim, half of it anyway, just to give it kind of like a start. And then with your tire wrenches, you just want to slowly, carefully work the rest of the tire back into place. You want to keep a couple of things in mind here. Once again, you don't want to put your hands into the cassette here because it's really sharp. So be careful and be cognizant of that. And then utilizing these tire wrenches, just slowly work the rest of the tire back into the rim. And the other thing you want to be cognizant of also while you're doing this is not puncturing the new tube that you've put in there with your tire wrenches. So it's a slow, careful process of just slowly working the tire back on. Put the tire back on, air in the tube, and the valve stem is nice and straight, so it's ready to be put back on the tire on the bike, which is what we're going to do right now. Okay, so we're going to put the tire back into the frame. It's a little tricky, but it's not too difficult. The first thing I like to do is just you lift up the tire and you just kind of slide the chain in place over the cassette, and then you are ready to tuck it into the frame insert. But before we do that, we want to insert, in the order that we took off, the washers. So that's the first one. That's the second one. And we're going to do it with the other side also. So these two, and then this one. So now we're ready to tuck the axle in place. You just kind of move it up. You want to make sure you get the rotor wheel in the brake. So be careful there while you're doing this. Okay, so what I've done is I've tightened up the rear axle on this side, remembering to put in proper order the washers that we took out. When you're putting this all back in place, before you tighten this fully, you want to make sure your rotor is in the caliper properly, you know, so it's mostly aligned. And I've done that. You can see it spins freely. If you're going to spin the tire freely, make sure you've tightened it up with your 18 mil, the axle nut. Otherwise it'll just fall out of place and you don't want that. So on the other side, this side here, you can see right in here, we've added the first two washers that we took out. Now we're going to add the other washers. And it's a little trickier than the left side. The right side's a little trickier. Once again, you have the insert here. You want to make sure that that goes on how you took it off. So that's the way it goes on. You just slide it over the... And as long as that insert tab is on the underside of the insert here, I know it's a little tricky to see. You'll see it when you're doing it. Just want to make sure that's tucked into place nicely. And then with the rest of the hardware, put that back into place. Like so, and we're going to tighten this up with the 18 mil wrench. We've tightened up both the axle nuts onto the axle, and we made sure they're nice and tight, nice and secure. That's pretty important. The next thing we're going to do is slip on the plastic cover just to protect the electric. So the cover's back in place here. Earlier in the video we unplugged this. We're going to plug it in right now, but I just want to make sure, just to point out, that the cable itself goes under the derailleur guard. And when you're lining this up, you've got two arrows on the cables. They have to kind of go in with each other. So I'll show you what I mean by that, like so. And then you know that you have properly attached the cables if those two arrows line up. Perfect. And don't forget, we did clip off one of the cables that hold the housing in place, and we want to put a new one back. So we'll do that, and then we'll just trim it down using our cable cutter here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just finish it off by putting some air into the tires. This is a pretty important step. And what you want to do here as you're putting air into the tires is you want to be cognizant of the rim here. You can see the bead is not bulging up at any one spot. And that's what you sort of want to focus on. I'll just go slowly here, and you can see that I've properly seated the bead on the rim. If it's improperly seated, you'll know because it will bubble up and you'll see kind of a wobble. That's actually pretty good, and you want to look on the other side too, just to make sure that you've seated it properly on both sides. So we're just going to put the valve cap on. Once you got air in the tire and you know your tire is properly seated, you can put the valve cap on, and that's good. And then don't forget to put your Volt advertising on the bike. We appreciate that. Tuck it into place here. It's all Velcroed on. It's pretty easy to do. There you go. Look at that. That looks nice and sharp. So that's how you put air into a rear tube on a Volt Mariner bicycle. Hope you enjoyed the video. It was a pleasure doing it, and we're looking forward to you watching some more videos on bicycle repairs on